All right, everyone, good evening and welcome to our first installment of the CavanKerry Press virtual reading series in 2025. That's right, everyone. This is the first reading of 2025, and it is number 38 in our series of this virtual reading. We're so close to 40. Bridget, thank you so much for celebrating that with us. And I am so honored to be the host for tonight's reading. We have Bridget here, who is publishing our book, our first book of the year. With all that we ask of you is to always be happy. And please, Bridget, hold up that beautiful book for us. We want to see it. So gorgeous. And you're going to be reading some breathtaking poems from that tonight as we celebrate you. And we also have Eugenia Leigh as a guest to be reading also. And she's going to be reading from her book by Four Way Books, Bianca. Please do support these authors if you haven't already. In the chat, you're going to get the link to those books. And tell us how amazing that these authors are through the course of this evening. Before we begin, I'm going to give you the run of show. We're going to start with Dana Harris Travado, who is our Director of Development, who's going to give us a land acknowledgement and a bit more about CavanKerry. Afterwards, we'll go into Eugenia Leigh, where she'll read for about 15 minutes. Then we'll go to the feature of the night, Bridget, well, the second feature, the publishing feature, who will be reading for about 20 minutes. And afterwards, we'll have a Q&A discussion with everyone. But throughout the night, we want to hear from you. So if you love Bridget's haircut, if you love Eugenia's bookcase, please put that in the comments. If you love any of the work and are captivated by that work, also put that in the comments, because I send this chat to the readers after the reading so they could love all of that poetry vibrations that we were sending through. If you have any questions for our poets, also put that in the chat, and I'll be sure to acknowledge those questions at the end for our conversation. So without further ado, here is Dana.
Hello, greetings everyone. I'm Dana Harris Travado, and I'm Director of Development for CavanKerry Press. I am a middle-aged white woman with black chin-length hair, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck sweater. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the latest, the first of the year in CavanKerry's series of virtual readings, where we celebrate our new and forthcoming releases. Before the reading begins, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that the land we occupy in Bergen County, New Jersey, belongs to the Munsee Lenape people. We honor their history. We cannot function in our work as artists, advocates, and activists, nor offer a safe space for all writers without understanding the struggle for Indigenous rights. We've added to the chat a map of native lands for you to identify the land you occupy, and also a few links for resources so you can learn more and/or offer your support. We also wanted to take a moment to address the recent unprecedented governmental decisions causing immediate, adverse, far-reaching consequences, especially for communities that have been strategically neglected, underserved, and exploited throughout the history of our country. While CavanKerry occupies but a small space in the publishing landscape, we've always made it our mission to care for and support all voices, and our commitment remains steadfast. We believe in the power of words to uplift communities and connect individuals from all backgrounds, perspectives, and experiences. We will continue undaunted the vital work of our publishing and programming in order to foster a safe and welcoming environment for all writers. Now I turn it back to Marketing and Communications Director, Dimitri Reyes, to introduce our readers tonight.
Thank you so much, Dana. And we do believe in the power of words, and it's so important for us to all be here with each other. So thank you all for joining us this evening. For my visual description, I am a younger Hispanic male of brown skin with black hair and a black beard. I have black and brown glasses, and I'm wearing a gray turtleneck. So CavanKerry is a turtleneck club this evening. So at this point in time, I am going to zoom myself out, zoom Bridget out, and we're going to introduce Eugenia Leigh to start us off. So Eugenia Leigh is a Korean-American poet and the author of Bianca, Four-Way Books 2023, and Blood, Sparrows, and Sparrows, Four-Way Books 2014. Eugenia serves as a poetry editor at the Adroit Journal and as Valentine's editor, so get those poems in, at Honey Literary. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else, here is Eugenia Leigh.
Thank you so much, Dimitri, and thank you, Dana. I expected that I might tear up at some point, but I didn't think I would tear up in Dana's moving just proclamation of the mission at CavanKerry. So thank you. That was really lovely to hear in such an atrocious time. And happy Pub Day to Bridget. This book is phenomenal. Oh, but first, let me introduce myself. Sorry. I'm Eugenia Leigh. A visual description of myself is that I'm a 40-year-old Korean American woman, light-skinned with long, wavy brownish hair and gold-rimmed glasses. I've got bright red lipstick on. The shade is Lady Danger, which I thought was appropriate for the evening. And I'm wearing a short sleeve black and white sweater because I didn't get the turtleneck memo. I'm in front of a bunch of bookshelves. So I'm actually going to start by reading one of Bridget's poems from All That We Ask of You Is to Always Be Happy. I love it when a title can be sarcastic, which I think is phenomenal. And in the blurb that I wrote for Bridget's book, I said that I read her book with my whole mouth open. And by that, I meant that just like after every poem, my jaw was dropping because I was like, we're talking about this out loud and not just to each other. I didn't know we were allowed. But the telling and the divulging in Bridget's poems is never gratuitous. It's always meaningful, it's always purposeful, and Bridget's poems never sacrifice music or language or craft while they tell us that truth. And so the poem that I'll share is called My Doctor Recounts to Me an Anecdote, and it is a prose poem that appears in the beginning of Bridget's book. My doctor recounts to me an anecdote of a patient's vagina that exploded, how he mended her erupted flesh, explained it like one might explain the process of patching a hole in jeans or supergluing a hand back on a dropped statue. I think, when can I hold my baby? Because I just had a baby. I mean, literally, my son was just born. And this doctor is telling me a story about the worst vaginal tear he's ever seen. And because I am prone to thinking about random ass shit at weird times, I think of my ex-boyfriend's dad, who was a gastroenterologist. How once he took me out to breakfast at a Greek diner while my boyfriend played golf. And to make conversation, I asked him about his favorite patient ever. She was a lovely woman, classy, elegant, who had an unfortunate tear in her perineum, leaking fluids. So that's two women whose tears have become stories belonging to men. And I'm worried because when the baby came out, he wasn't crying, and the doctor keeps looking from my vagina to the team of pediatric doctors that flutter around my son like he's nervous too. But he continues on with his story. I didn't think I'd be able to fix her. His face is framed by my open legs. Her husband should send me flowers, he said, as he pushed through me with a needle and thread. Bridget Bell, everybody. So a little bit about myself and for some context for my poems. Both of my books handle my family history of childhood abuse, domestic violence, parental incarceration. My father was in prison the entire time I was a teenager, and parental deportation. He was eventually deported to South Korea, a country that he hadn't been to since he was 10 years old, as a ticket out of prison, because that's what we do here. And there were 9 years between my first book and my recent book, Bianca, which is what I'll read from. And during those 9 years, there was a lot of life lived. I got married, I had 2 miscarriages, and I had my son. And during that time, I also finally got the privilege of getting mental health help. And in my mid-30s, I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, thanks to my special childhood, and bipolar 2 disorder. So the first poem I'll share with you is called June 14th. And the only term that you might need to know is DNC, which is shorthand for an abortion procedure. That is also a procedure used for missed miscarriages, which are the types of miscarriages that don't bleed out by themselves and kind of just stay in the body. And both of my miscarriages were missed, and I had a DNC for both. But of course, now this procedure is being inhumanely denied to so many people in this country. June 14th. My children, if I may call them that identical pair of beings, quick to arrive, then quick to die, quit my body a year ago today. Not quit. I opted for the DNC to say they didn't leave. I did nothing to make them leave. They were taken in my sleep. The animal I became conjured the animal I once was, fiend and brute and wretch, back to the wreck my husband had never met. And that lie, hounding since the first night I woke howling next to him, startled, tentative. This life doesn't belong to you. I was warned about the nightmares, that in our first years of marriage, my hells would hunt me in my sleep. All my life, my mother locked our knife block beneath the kitchen sink. Did you know not all women hide their knives from their husbands? I married a man who owns a knife sharpener. He slices everything soundlessly, the way he learned in a class about knives. I chop our produce with an air of panic, like a child who found the murder weapon. My husband once leapt out of a closet in the dark to make me laugh. I wept. No one prepares you for the terrors of a good man. My mother still calls to ask whether our doors are locked. Maybe there is no cure for this, the way the brain bends after trauma and bends the world with it. Even now, a baby cross-legged inside me, I scan the day for traces of soot sullying this honeyed life. Who was it years ago who told me, afraid and racked with undeserving, to find a mirror and look myself in the eyes? I think of this next poem, The First Leaf, as a palinode, which is a poetic term I only recently learned, which is a term for a poem in which a poet retracts a statement that they made in a previous poem. And the thing that I said in a poem in my first book is that I forgive my father. But motherhood and therapy gave me access to rage, which, of course, is the other side of fear. The first leaf. I thought I forgave you. Then I took root and became someone's mother. This unending dread, ever checking for his breath. I have never wanted to be less like you than I do now, daily gauging the venom, how much of you blights my blood. When my baby wails, I ask whether I too could beat his body quiet. And when I choose to be a mother, choose to be tender to my child, a choice my mangled brain makes each day, my fury surges. The distance between him alive and him dead is how well I am. And I think about the woman in the news who poured water on her sleeping baby's face. And I think how for decades I was grateful you never killed me, how that was enough to make me think you loved me. I raged as a child, but never in the right direction. So when my therapist said that not killing me yet didn't mean not killing me ever, that if I had stayed, I would have died, I had to watch her get angry to know to get angry. On the 8th week of the pandemic, my son, whom I sheltered at home for all that time, found on our 5th floor balcony a tiny green leaf the width of his pinky. The last time we strolled outside, the city was frigid, frost everywhere we looked. And Dad, let me tell you, the leaf stunned us both. Unexpected, like the olive branch snatched by the dove barreling back to the ark. He refused to let go. The first leaf of all the leaves my child will ever hold. He looks so much like his father, nothing at all like us. Gold. I've become the kind of creature who, on Sundays, fills 7 small boxes with a bevy of pills to stick it out another week. When will I be fixed enough to hear my kids scream without tearing my father's phantom hands off me? How do demons, decades gone now, still ravage me? Tell me I am not the thing my child will have to survive. Tell me the mob I inherited will not touch my son. Yes, the cavalcade of all that's tried to kill me may forever raid my brain, but know this. In my mother's first language, the word for fracture, for crack, is the same as the word for gold. Every Thursday for 21 months before my son was born, a doctor trained me to put the gun down and write. I understand. I am one of the lucky ones. And I'll just read one more poem from Bianca. So during the 9 years between books, there was also a period of about 3 years when I was very depressed. I'd cut myself off from my writing community. I wasn't writing, I wasn't reading. So I did what any poet would do. I subscribed to the Scientific American. I was like, I need material. And it was many months of subscriptions, and I got 2 poems out of it. And this is one of them. And it started out, I wrote the first draft when I was a single person. I hadn't even met my husband yet. And then the final draft somehow contains both my husband and my child, these new people who live here. How the dung beetle finds its way home. True, according to the Scientific American. The Milky Way's glinting ribbon helps the dung beetle roll his good ball of shit back to the ones he loves. But blind him to the sky with as little as a hat, and he will swerve like a drunk who, if he makes it home alive, might find the family soured with waiting, gone. Drawers cleared, beds cold, even the watercolor arc of giraffes and raptors pulled from the face of the fridge. See, I want to tell my missing father, it's a metaphor so simple, it's almost not worth writing down. Even beetles need the stars to nudge them back to where they need to be when they need to be there, toward their little ones' gummy grins, ever pardoning the grisliest parent. I am 34 with a son the day my mother tells me she enrolled in a 4-day seminar about how to be a good mom. A little late, I know. Once, in a rage, I left my husband and our sleeping child. Where did you go? Friends ask when I tell the story. I wish I'd had a grander plan. I wish I'd stood on the roof of our building and, empowered by that single Brooklyn star, I'd ripped up the book of my parents' sins. Or I wish I could tell someone the truth, that I fear I am the kind of woman who could leave the one good family God had the gall to give her. Really, I sat on the stairwell leading up to the roof and wept until a large bug threatened my life, at which point I recalled the dung beetles, stopped blaming my parents, and thanking the metaphorical stars, I rolled up my pile of shit and trudged back home. Thank you.
Eugenia, that was amazing. That was so amazing. And like I said to Eugenia before we all came on, I was reading this in the doctor's office today, and I was just blown away by the work. And also, I didn't catch at the doctor's office the movements between the humor and the stark contrast and a lot of that tension. So we're going to end up talking about that later, but genius work, Eugenia, and thank you. I'm going to beam you out for now, and then we'll call you back in for the conversation and Q&A. Thank you. So everyone, this is the reminder. We have a chat box either on the bottom or on the side where there's beautiful comments you can leave. And you can also leave comments, hearts, beautiful emojis about perhaps links to the books that can be bought today. So we have Bianca by Eugenia Leigh, which will be available. And if you don't have your copy yet of Bridget Bell's book, it's going to be there as well. It's going to be in the comments. So make sure that you go check that out. So without further ado, we are going to introduce Bridget Bell. Bridget, hi, Bridget. Nice to see you here.
Hi.
Bridget Bell teaches composition and literature at Durham Technical Community College in Durham, North Carolina. Originally from Toledo, Ohio, she is a graduate of Sarah Lawrence's MFA program in creative writing. All That We Ask of You Is to Always Be Happy is her debut poetry collection, and she will be reading from it this evening as we celebrate the launch and the ushering of this wonderful book into the world. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Bridget Bell.
Hi, everybody. Quick visual description. I am a 41-year-old woman with light skin. I have dark hair and bangs. I have a gap between my front teeth, and I'm wearing a green dress with puffy sleeves. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much to CavanKerry, Dimitri, and Dana and Gabe. Eugenia, you are amazing. I'm so honored to be reading with you. When Dimitri told me that I needed to pick someone to read with for this launch, you came to my mind immediately. And I'm just even more blown away by the way our works talk to each other. I also want to thank everybody in the audience, all my family and friends. I've been scrolling through to see who's all there, and I feel so completely loved and supported. This book is dedicated to my children, Evelyn and Sean, who are watching right now with my parents in my house. I am out in my office, and I'm just so excited to be sharing all of this with you. So I want to start the reading with an epigraph. So each section of the book begins with an epigraph or a couple epigraphs that I've pulled from different scholarly journals, because it was really important to me that the book be rooted in academic research. So I want to give two of those epigraphs just to give some context to the poems. This is from the New England Journal of Medicine. Postpartum depression is a disabling but treatable mental disorder that represents one of the most common complications of childbearing. And this is from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Despite the recognition that the postpartum year is a vulnerable and important time, existing approaches to support postpartum mothers are lacking, especially in the United States. So the first poem that I'm going to read is a good entry to the collection. It's not until page 17, but it gives, I think, kind of a really good summary of my experience with postpartum depression and it's after Connie Voisin's Dangerous for Girls. I was fortunate to have Connie write one of the blurbs for the back of the book, and Dangerous for Girls is a poem that I really admire. So this poem is called Dangerous for Mothers. It was the summer of crumbling in the pediatrician's office when she turned from my newborn daughter to ask me, "And how's mom doing?" My hand floating a Dixie cup of water to my lips, and the doctor squeezing my other hand, admitting she didn't love her son, really love her son, until he was 4 months old. It was the summer of understanding that I should be so hungry, but never feeling hunger, forcing down a milkshake and a corn dog from Cookout, breathing through each bite with dingy eyes. Knowing I needed to eat, my mother fed me pieces of waffle drowned in maple syrup while the baby hummed and sucked. It was the summer I was scared to read the word psychosis, as if it could turn me into the mother who strapped her baby to her chest and jumped tandem off a high-rise balcony. That summer, the OB erred when he said I'd be okay, or rather he said, "You have no history of mental illness." And I was not alone that summer. Everywhere are always women who stare down at their babies and wish them away, begging to wake up years earlier, lonely and free. Instead of waking up, that summer I slept, even when I was awake, peering through the haze at visitors who trilled, "We love the baby." I watched greeting cards pile up, pale pink and sparkly, blessing, little angel, princess, precious. And then the crumbling would appear again, like a mudslide caving in a village. And I'd drop my head on the kitchen table and cry next to a plate of Chinese takeout. My mother said, "Maybe you need more sleep," after the OB said I would be fine, though I couldn't imagine fine, while the world chanted, "Love the baby, love the baby." I searched for other mothers' stories and folded up in relief when I read about a woman who pictured her baby floating dead in a swimming pool. "I'm going to repeat what you said to make sure I understand what you are feeling," the therapist explained after I choked my dread into the phone. So I listened as he told me the plan to get me better. Psychiatrist, Zoloft, support group, Ativan, counseling, sleep. I pressed a damp Kleenex into a small compact square, nervous through the tips of my fingers. And this will save me. For some women, becoming a mother is not natural so much as it is gradual. And so we condemn ourselves, drifting along, flashing the bright red smile of a facade, balancing over the void like a tightrope walker, crossing for the first time without a net. I'm looking at myself in the image and I can see that I have like a nervous rash on my chest, but I'm okay. I don't want anyone to think I'm not okay because of this nervous rash. When I was in a support group for perinatal mood disorders, so if I say PMADs at any point today, I mean perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. That's what a PMAD is. When I was in a support group, there was a woman in that group who had a partner who didn't believe in postpartum depression, and I was super fortunate in my experience that my family and my friends always supported me and believed me. And so this poem is for that mother specifically that was in my support group. It's called "This is for the Mother," and then there's a parenthetical after that that says "Perinatal Mood Disorders Inpatient Unit." This is for the mother who collapses on the starched white sheets after weeks of no line between day and night, unanswered yawn of insomniac stretches, eyes hummed dry by the screen's blue light. This is for the mother whose body is jerked by babies that tug like puppeteers, for the mother whose husband doesn't believe in postpartum depression, who's hit by arrows tipped with, "That's crazy mumbo jumbo," and "It's just the baby blues." This is for the mother who relinquishes her body to the clinic bed, who watches the nurse's promises, "You're not crazy," drift up like smoke signals as they pull the laces from her shoes, remove the drawstrings from her clothes. There's a few poems in the book that follow that "This is for the mother" title, and the parentheticals are all different. And so this is called "This is for the Mother, Intrusive Thoughts." And it is a compilation of different intrusive thoughts that I either had or that I read about people having when they had postpartum depression, or that people told me about when I was talking to them about it. And I think that when people have these kind of thoughts, saying them out loud is so important, because it normalizes them, because so many people have these kind of dark thoughts. So this is called "This is for the Mother, Intrusive Thoughts." This is for the mother who fixates on pressing the soft spot. Smashed fontanelle like a crushed gnat, or a peach wet with bruised juice. For the mother who sees the baby slip from her loose grip, trip down the basement stairs, concrete flip. This is for the mother who fabricates the blue fat face under the bathwater's skim, who shuts her eyes by the microwave to block the conjured thought of her baby inside. For the mother who washes the knives quickly to get them out of her hands. For the mother who can confide this. For the mother who listens to the confession and doesn't flinch. I want to do one more "This is for the Mother" poem. And this one is about postpartum psychosis. This isn't an epigraph in the book, but I thought it was important to give a little bit of context to this poem. So this is just something that I pulled from the National Library of Medicine about postpartum psychosis. Postpartum psychosis is a severe mental crisis that warrants immediate medical attention. Although considered a psychiatric emergency, most patients respond to treatment and demonstrate fast recovery and remission. This is for the mother, postpartum psychosis. And this is the one where I'm predicting I might cry at the end. This is for the mother, postpartum psychosis. This is for the mother repeating Bible verses in the dark. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. And for the mother in Hartnett County, who pulls a white sheet over her daughter, her son, shoots the dog, shoots herself, who loses the mental health lottery, splits off into the less than 1% chance. And this is for the mother who smells horses, hears mares galloping outside her bedroom door, who watches walls pulse like open veins, who wears a flat affect, her face empty like plates after dinner, who won't eat, convinced of poisoned food, who pleads for the hands of a deep sparing lake. If you can hear me, I am sorry we left you alone. I am sorry we failed you. All right. So after all of that, you might be wondering why anyone in the world would have a second child after they've gone through something like this. But But I do have a second child. I have a daughter who is 10 and I have a son who is 8. And there's a really great quote that is the epigraph to the third section by a woman named Karen Kleiman, who wrote a really, she's a maternal mental health expert. She wrote a really amazing book that's called This Isn't What I Expected, that is about, that is about overcoming postpartum depression. This quote is actually from one of her books that's called, I'm gonna misquote it, but it's something along the lines of like, what the heck am I doing? If you ask a woman who is currently depressed how she feels about having another baby, she will likely say she will never have any more children. If you ask a woman who has recovered from postpartum depression how she feels about having another baby, she is likely to say she is afraid. So this poem is another poem that is written after a poet whose work I really admire. So this is written after a poem by a poet named Barbara Rass, and her poem is called A Wife Explains Why She Likes Country, as in country music. And the title of my poem is A Survivor of Postpartum Depression Explains Why She Wants Another Baby. It's just a short little poem. Because eventually the gray smog dissipates and a fullness rises, a hum laced with ache and joy. Because I always go back for more. Another helping of potatoes heaped high, the creamy, cold nightcap, even when it hurts. Because I learn from the hurt. Because I love to be animalistic, pick at cradle cap, groom my infant as gorillas do. Because I'm a masochist. Because eyes stop changing colors. Because my body is already ruined. Because clamped fists shake like a colt on new legs. Because the pull of life is the strongest addiction. When I was pregnant with my son, my grandmother, who's we called Annie, O-N-N-I-E, was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And we knew that she wasn't going to live long enough to meet my son. And so this is a little sonnet that I wrote about that experience. And I know I saw in the list of guests that all of my aunts and uncle are here. So all of Annie's kids are here tonight. And so I really wanted to read this poem in honor of her. It's called Lemons and Grapefruits. For Eileen Burton, 1918 to 2016. It is like an ant colony, you're right. Against the silver sink faucet, she props her head, vomits. Her shoulder blades underneath pink silk pajamas chop right angles into the air. Multiplying cells raid our bodies, fetus and tumor, both euphemized in edible metaphors. I'm a lemon, she's a grapefruit, and July is too far away. I'll eulogize her in an Ohio winter while the paper mill pollutes the cold, thin air. But today, she is only dying, not dead. So she can still say, I wish I could meet the baby. And I catch the subjunctive, subtle in its imagined possibility, verifying what we both understand. July is too distant in its sunny persistence. By then, she'll be non-existent. We found out the sex of the baby while she was still alive. I got like an early sonogram at one of those baby boutique places because it was like earlier than my doctor would do it. And so she got to know that I was having a son and that his name was going to be Sean. So another thing about having another child after you've had a perinatal mood disorder is that you're at a higher risk for having a reoccurrence. And so when I decided that I was going to have a second child, it was really important to me to have a plan in place if I felt like I was starting to get sick again. And I had an amazing therapist named Bill Meyer, the late Bill Meyer, who worked at Duke. And he and I had a plan in place. As I got closer to the end of my second pregnancy, he and I started checking in more. And I had a plan that if I started having symptoms again, I would go back on medication. And probably around the 7th month of my pregnancy, I started feeling kind of myself not slipping, but I started to feel symptoms of depression again. And so this is a poem called "I'm Not Waiting It Out to See If I Feel Better." When the arachnid recommences her sticky weave through my brain's gray matter, I do not wait for the tangle of her strong threaded web to take shape. Because it is a goddamn lie to say a spider won't bite you if you just leave it alone. To leave it alone is the most ruinous choice I could make. So instead, I heed the signal of danger marked on her glossy body that hangs upside down. Smash open the red hourglass, turn her poison into rubies, and fill my hands. I just have to be on the record saying that I would actually never kill a spider. And that I'm one of those people that like slowly removes insects on a paper towel from her house. So it's a metaphor, y'all. The last poem that I'm going to read tonight feels super fitting for a time when we need, I think, a little bit of anger, a little bit of resistance. And this is written in dedication to Bill Meyer, who I mentioned just previously, who was the therapist that was really pivotal in helping me get on track to recovery. Nancy, oh my gosh, I just saw my friend Nancy in the chat who is tuning in from Chile. So this is called Elegy. For those, if you don't know, an elegy is a poem that's written in honor of someone who has died. And so this is called Elegy with Resistance. And it starts with a little excerpt from Duke School of Medicine's tribute to Bill Meyer. With incredible compassion, kindness, and expertise, Bill provided care to some of our most vulnerable patients, including women with postpartum depression and those experiencing miscarriage and pregnancy loss. Bill died in 2021 during the pandemic after a long struggle with bladder cancer. Elegy with Resistance. The farmer's field across the road from your home office, did you ever go there? Is perfect in April, with its shiny strawberries like red buttons sewn along each runner's green reach. It's my favorite place to pick your own, though I surmise from the Thank You Jesus yard signs, it's run by religious zealots. Their website spotlights a woman labeled Farmer Mike's wife. Farmer Mike's picture is captioned, Farmer Mike. I know you'd roll your eyes at that, the implied triviality of her name, that most vital bit of identity denied. I know you would recognize it as bullshit, as a systematic issue, and I'd love you for that. I loved you. I did. I do. Death confuses tense. Though, of course, I could never tell you that while you were living. Cruel the way roles keep us from telling someone they are loved, though I suspect you knew. I can't believe I don't know where you are buried, or even if you are buried. Death in the pandemic can be so private. But in spring, I will return to that field, claim it as a place of praise, a place of resistance. Like each time you told a new mother, your job is to keep the baby alive. If you do that, you are good enough. That phrase, good enough, a small act of subversion against the expectations of a world like Farmer Mike's. Maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe Mike is quite lovely, like his field. Regardless, I will still look the other way when my kids eat straight from their hands what never lands in the bucket. Each unpaid berry, a little dig at Farmer Mike, just in case. And I will think of you, how you'd appreciate that small act of subversion. And I will think of you each time I pull a berry from its stem, gentle, so as to not bruise the skin. And I will think of you as I lug all that fruit home. Think of how you taught me to thrive under the weight of a new name, Mother. And I will think of you as I carve out the hull and pith, muddle the berries into a bright, pulpy mess. Stir in cups and cups of sugar, a packet of pectin to make freezer jam. The way I hope Farmer Mike's wife makes it. Less complicated, less time consuming than cooked jam, but still good enough. Thank you, everybody.
Oh my gosh, Jesus. Please help. Oh my gosh. I am literally between Eugenia and Bridget, y'all. I'm not going to lie. I had to look up the moon phases tonight because I was like, is there a full moon? I'm like so much an empath tonight and feeling all that energy in the body with the poems from both of you. Bridget, that was amazing, amazing. You and Eugenia can unmute yourselves because we're gonna transfer over to our conversation and Q&A portion. And if anyone has questions, please put them in the comments. The chat has been lit up all night with you two. It's been so just amazing and active. And Bridget, like a Eugenia, you could definitely probably speak to this with Bianca, but I think there's just going to be so much healing, Bridget, when you start going on your tour to read to audiences virtually and in person. You've had all of us in tears and in the palm of your hands that were holding that book for the duration of the period, and it's just it's a beautiful thing. So thank you for that. And Gabe and I have been preparing questions. Usually it's really great because we have a Zoom reading template where we put questions for everyone. And every reading, our minds are just lit up and we're going back and forth with different questions because there's just so much overlap and so much amazingness that happens. Especially looking at these CavanKerry books when they're in their infancy and they get picked up by us, right? And getting those emotions again and seeing those glimmers of magic and then seeing them manifested into a full-fledged book like Bridget, it's beautiful. So starting with this question, Eugenia mentioned reading your book open-mouthed, as if saying we can say that in our work. And Eugenia, actually, you are speaking truth to histories for families and particularly in women. And you hold close to them, and things that women hold close and very quiet to themselves. So I'm wondering how you both approach writing very vulnerable work.
Eugenia, you
Breathing.
want to take that one?
Yeah. Maybe we'll start
Are
with
you-
Eugenia. Yeah.
Um, I think I had great mentors who did that. I didn't set out to want to be a poet who wanted to tell my family story. My earliest poems were very obtuse, and I liked to hide a lot. But my first poetry mentor, she had come from an abusive marriage, and she could see the things that I was hiding. And she's Laurent Bosselar. She lives now in Santa Barbara, and she would see my poems and say, I think this is the story. Tell me more about your dad. And I'd be like, who? Like, why are you asking me these questions? And I would just cry in her office, and she would tell me, you can cry now and be a poet later. But I think that practice of just being physically vulnerable in front of this poet eventually led me to be able to try my hand at telling some of these stories.
That's beautiful, Eugenia. Thank you. And you're already talking about it, the idea of community, right? And I think you even mentioned like when you were depressed and you were out of the writing community, there was something that always brings you back to that too. So it's beautiful to note. Thank you. Bridget?
I I have always kind of written my way through difficult situations, whether those were poems that ended up seeing the light of day or not. And so it was sort of natural to me that when I was going through this, that I started writing about it. And then I was certainly, I don't know, Eugenia, if you like ever felt this or got this sort of message that like poets run the risk of being like too sentimental or like too confessional. And I feel like I internalized that a lot, like maybe through grad school and through workshops and stuff like that. But truly, like the poets I love the best are often very confessional and very emotional. And I think I just kind of got to the point where I was like, screw it. Like, I want to talk about this stuff. And I think it's important. And I guess I don't really care anymore if it feels like too vulnerable or too emotional or too confessional. So it's what I've always been drawn to. As a reader, and it's what I've always kind of done naturally as a writer.
Yeah. That's wonderful. It's so interesting too, like when we get into programs sometimes or writing groups that like will hang on to certain things people say, and then it almost like even becomes an identity, even though we're refusing our own identity and
Yeah.
talking about like the confessional space of it. Because, as writers, there is a very fine line between something confessional feeling, I guess, I don't know, like flowery versus something more authentic, right? And if the confessional is your authentic voice, that's exactly what it is. Which I think actually goes into an interesting question. And this one is by Chris Parker in the chat. And the question simply is, what makes you vulnerable? I guess you can interpret that like you will, or how you will, rather. So, what makes you vulnerable?
Do you mean me specifically or like the collective you?
That's
Um,
my question.
that's up to it. That's up to interpretation. How would you like to answer it, Bridget? I guess for the sake of the book, maybe the you, and then maybe that could speak to the collective.
For the sake of the book, me.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, there's certainly, I think probably the hardest thing in terms of vulnerability of writing this book and putting it out there is, and I think I'm just kind of scrolling through. I think she's listening right now. I have been, and I still am really concerned with how my children will receive this
Mhm.
message and how they'll receive these poems. And I feel incredibly vulnerable sharing this story with them, because I'm scared that they will be hurt by it. But I think that if I gave in to that sort of fear and wasn't vulnerable in that space, then I would sort of just be doing what I don't want people to do, which is to not talk about it. And so I'm trying to be vulnerable with my children and explain to them, what all this means, and try to give them the context for understanding it, and for knowing that, these mental health struggles we go through are their illnesses, their researched medical conditions, and it has nothing to do with our how we feel about them as parents. Eugenia, how are you vulnerable?
No, that was beautiful. I think that actually struck me earlier when you said that your children were listening, and I was like, and then I caught myself reacting that way, and I was like, no, that's such a beautiful um, modeling of how to be in the world and to share that with your children. I think that it's really beautiful. So thank you for that. Um, for me, it wasn't until college that I was able to be honest about my childhood abuse and the domestic violence in my family, particularly because my dad was actually also a Christian minister. And so, there would be hell at home, and then we'd have to like put on our church clothes and go to church, and Korean churches are very gossipy, and so there was a lot of lying. And I remember in middle school when he was in prison for like the final time, the longest time, my mom actually told me that he was a missionary in the Philippines until I got a collect call from the Los Angeles Correctional Facility. So I grew up not telling the truth. And I remember in seventh grade, we had an assignment where we had to choose a poet and recite a poem. And I chose Anne Sexton because I was 12 and her name had the word sex in it. I had no idea who she was. And and there was this poem that stood out to 12-year-old Eugenia. It's called Red Roses, and it was only published posthumously. And it's this thinly veiled poem that's kind of sing-songy, and it's about a mother abusing her 3-year-old child. And I remember I memorized it, I recited it in front of my seventh grade class, and I remember feeling like I get to tell the truth this way. Of course, nobody understood the poem, like nobody really reacted, and then we all moved on. The next child like recited their poem. But I think that that experience really stayed with me, and I think now in hindsight, it's sort of what has carried me to this point.
That's great. And thank you so much for the Anne Sexton reasoning behind it. I love our reasonings when we're 12, right? It made Nadia Alexis, one of our upcoming authors, laugh, and I'm sure it made some of the other ones of us laugh too. I can't speak because it was so funny. It's interesting too, because and also because it's like 8 o'clock and I like sleeping at this time. It's interesting too because like as both of you are talking, I work with poets that get really nervous about speaking honestly because they're afraid what their families are going to think about their work once they put it out. And this is something that comes up often in conversation with folks. And it's interesting because I think the issue with like having certain people know what our stories is ourselves trying to reconcile our own fears, right? And we don't even know how people are going to receive that until we put that work out there. So it's very fascinating. And it's necessary because what Gabe mentioned in our chat separately, he wanted to ask this question, and to both Bridget and Eugenia, I'm hoping you can talk a bit more about how society teaches women to internalize a denial of their own experiences, feelings, and hurts, and how writing poetry about those experiences help to reject that denial and to reclaim and assert a truth. And it's going to be in the chat, so we can also look at that too.
Yeah.
It's intense. I mean, so again, okay, it's there. So talking a bit about how society, let's break it down, how society teaches women to internalize the denial of their own experiences, feelings, and hurts. Let's start there first. So how do you approach that?
I can take it first if you want,
Sure.
Yeah,
Bridget.
yeah. Please do.
Um, well, I remember in middle school when my father was going off to prison for the first time, for the last time rather, that that those series of trials and court visits was more complicated because we belonged to a huge Korean church in Southern California where my father was a youth pastor, and the pastors would beg my mom like not to press charges, and they were like, we need him here, he's very important to the community, like please, rethink this. And um I had so many early experiences, like personal experiences of men trying to silence women, and I too myself was silenced. And I think that kind of training really carries, really stays with you, I think,
Right.
as you grow up. And I think really informed some of like the more toxic, unhealthy relationships that I fell into in my 20s. Um, but what I love about, I think, Gen Z and Gen Alpha is
Right.
that
Oh,
there are young women who are being taught to call it out.
yep.
And we're seeing this in so many organizations, in literary organizations, where the ways that people have previously behaved and have crossed, boundaries and had abuses of power. Sorry if you hear my 6-year-old yelling in the background. Hoping the mic doesn't pick him up. That was loud. Sorry. um, I just am awed by the community of young women and just young people of all genders who are calling out a lot of these abuses and
Mhm.
taking these people to task, right? Like specifically like older men who have you know abused their powers in so many ways. And it's like striking to me because I'm seeing this in a lot of the organizations that we all sort of belong to. And I'm constantly amazed because I think I'm constantly reminded of how in my 20s that was not me. Like I was not doing that.
Mhm.
I was like at the club, like letting this man grope me because I thought that's what we were supposed to do. Like I didn't
Mhm.
know. And I think there's a lot of grief in that, but there's also a lot of gratitude in that, to see that as we right now we're like in this time of chaos and we feel like the world is ending and everything is getting worse. But at the
Mhm.
same time, there are young people and communities that are so devoted to being subversive, using Bridget's word earlier, right? And
Mhm.
to taking back that power. And we see that. And if we just focus on that, we see that actually maybe the world is improving in other ways as well.
Right, right. There's always that dichotomy, especially in the worst political times, where that's when you get the great thinkers and you get the great poets, right? That's when poets step out of that space of just being writers and they become those theologians and philosophers that we need. And I think we're seeing that with our younger generation now. And that's just another one of many examples of just the like the multi-generational learning that takes place with us that I feel like you touched on that's very, very important. So thank you for sharing that, Eugenia. Bridget?
Uh, I think that society teaches women to be people pleasers,
Mhm.
or to not rock the boat, and that in order to do that, in order to please people, a byproduct of that is that you need to do what that question says, right? Internalize or deny your own experiences
Mhm.
sometimes. Um, and it's interesting because I think that sometimes it's not even um, ill intended. I'm thinking about the doctor in my poem who basically said to me, like, it's super common to cry after you have a baby. You know, my wife cried after she had her baby. I didn't read this poem, but he essentially asked me, you know, are you thinking about like throwing your baby out of the window and running away? Like, do you think you'll do that? And I didn't think I was going to actually do that. And so I sort of just said, you know, no. And he told me, well, then I think you're okay. And I wanted, I wanted to be okay. I wanted to be what, you know, society wanted me to be. And so I internalized what I was feeling, or thought to myself, like, okay, well, I just gotta kind of dig in and get through this and pull myself up by my bootstraps and struggle through. And so for me, I think a lot of it is about society teaching women to want to please, and that then results in them burying feelings or denying their own experiences, because so often those feelings or experiences aren't pleasing. People don't want to hear them. But I totally agree with Eugenia and what she's saying about the younger generation. I mean, I see it in my 10-year-old daughter. Like, she's just like, she does not take shit. And it's, you know, it's great to kind of see that feistiness in younger people. So hopefully that sort of denying of one's own experience will start to dissipate.
Yeah. Bridget, in terms of the people pleasing, if I could inquire, like, what was that moment where you started to reclaim that that's not the narrative that you wanted to have come across in your work?
Say that one more time.
Was there like a certain moment that had you reclaim that you didn't want that to be your narrative, the people pleasing?
Yeah. So you in the collection, or in
In general or in the collection, they're kind of one
yeah,
and the same, right?
yeah. I mean, at some point, personally, at some point, like, I just knew that no matter what, like, the medical community was telling me, I knew something was wrong. And I was so, like, desperate to get help, that I finally, like, it just got so bad that I was like, well, I don't care if you're telling me that I don't have a history of mental health, or like that this is normal. Like, I know that this is not normal.
Right.
And then in terms of the book, I think that, you know, when I started writing the book, I didn't set out to write a whole, when I started writing poems about this, I didn't necessarily start out to write a whole collection. But then as I wrote about it more and I got further into my own recovery, I just saw it as this potential to be a tool to help other people. Because for me, reading other people's stories while I was going through all of this was so important. And so it just became a thing that I felt compelled to do it, sort of as this like active resistance to push back against my own experience, and to put that out into the world, to push back against, you know, kind of the naysayers on the path of my own experience, and to put it out into the world as a way to help other people.
Yeah. That's amazing that you actually kind of segued yourself right into that next question, because both of you were such badasses in these books in order to talk about it in the way you guys talk about it. And I know that like these collections, a lot of them are just written from poem to poem of life experience, and then on a subconscious level, you see something starts manifesting, right? And that was kind of for you, Bridget, that was the tool that you needed to use to help other people, to help talk about that. Eugenia, when did your book, Bianca, start becoming less of a subconscious collection and more of something that started forming into this book? Like when did it change from a sheaf of poems and it's like, okay, I
Yeah.
got something here.
Yeah. You know, it was when I was trying to figure out the title. I thought I was writing a totally different book, because there were some earlier poems in there that thought they were doing something completely different. I didn't set out to write about mental illness or about being a mother or any of that. But then they did start coming out, and then it occurred to me that and the titles were so terrible. They were like Ravenous for Marvels. It was just like these like big, like abstract, like what is that? Like no one knows. Um, and then I remembered this essay that I had written before any of those poems, and it was an essay that I wrote during a PhD program that I dropped out of, and um, it was about a time when, in my 20s, before I was diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder, my friends would call like the nightmare version of me Bianca. And
Mm,
so, I would, and I was very high functioning, and but I would also, like, I was abusing alcohol, just be blackout drunk, and then the next morning my friends would be like, so Bianca was here last night, and I'd be
mm,
like, oh shit, what did Bianca
yeah.
do? And then they'd tell me what happened, and that was my first experience of really labeling the thing that was so yet to be diagnosed. But once I knew, then it occurred to me, like, I could call this Bianca. Once I knew that that's what the book was about, even though none of my poems had yet named Bianca, I suddenly saw like the narrative of like who I was, how she came to be bipolar 2 disorder, and who I am now. And I saw the arc, and it started to come together at that point.
Mm, mm. It's amazing what these moments are, right? Like, and I'm so glad that we're all poets because we were actually able to catch these. I feel like they're so fleeting for people, and
Right.
sometimes they won't even catch that. Thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with us with that, Eugenia, and giving us a bit of background on the story of Bianca. And this actually leads to Alexis Fitzgerald's question, talking about metaphors. So, Bridget, my postpartum metaphor was dropping my favorite mug and noticing my bloodied hands fight to put the cup back together, while there were many other mugs in my cabinet. I never put my favorite mug back together. I learned to like a different mug. The mug represented my
Hmm.
identity. Bridget, how did you land on a spider for your metaphor?
I knew I wanted to write a poem about what it feels like to be on to be someone who has been through a depressive episode and then get well and then feel another episode starting to come on, which is what I was starting to feel towards the end of my pregnancy with my son. And the idea of like a spider creating its web to trap something felt like what my brain was doing.
Yeah.
Like it was starting to ruminate, and it was starting to create these webs and this cloudiness that I was able to recognize because I had been through it before. And then this idea of the Black Widow is really, if you've ever seen a Black Widow in real life, they're actually quite beautiful. They're very glossy and have this beautiful red marking on them. And so I loved the idea of taking this thing of danger and poison and death, and kind of turning it around and being able to create that image at the end of the poem, where the speaker fills her hands with rubies, because just because something is really horrible and hard, with the right support and the right medication and treatment and all of those
Mhm.
things, you can actually kind of take this sort of awful, sometimes deadly thing and turn it into something really beautiful and powerful. So the spider, and then specifically the Black Widow, felt apt for that.
Yeah, that's great. And it's wild. I talked about some of these things being subconscious when we're writing. And I would say like even the metaphors sometimes come in subconsciously from some
Mhm.
sort of ether, right? And you know, when the muse calls and the muse knocks, you gotta open the door. So that's great. I think Gabe said that in a meeting earlier this week. So, our meetings are also poetic, our staff meetings. Since
I
we're
say that
poets.
all the time. That one.
So I'll have two more short questions, and thank you everyone for your patience and for being here and being so engaged with our two lovely guests for this evening. So this first question, the first of the last questions here is there a poem from your collections that are too hard to read? Is there a poem from your collection that you can't really take it there as of right now?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you to read it now. I'm not. You
The
have to
answer is yes.
Yeah.
That's all I
Now,
can.
is it more than one, Bridget?
There's two.
Okay. All right.
Can you
I
tell us
would.
what they're about or no? You don't have to.
Eugenia, I'll email you.
Okay. Okay.
I get the
That's
scoop.
fair. That's fair. That's
I'm
fair.
sorry.
want
I
to
don't
be.
want to be, I don't want to be secret keeping.
Oh,
No, it's okay. I'm sorry I put you on the spot.
No. It's totally fine. It's totally fine.
yeah.
I would say, okay, so I guess I should add some context. They're not too hard to read from a maternal mental health standpoint.
Uh-huh.
They're too hard to read from a standpoint of relationships that have evolved since I last wrote the poem.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. And that's going to be a continuation too. Like, just as time goes, the relationship with that continues to evolve. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, I hope, Bridget, that you find some equilibrium with that. But it seems like you've already come to terms with it just existing in the book, and that's also fine, right? That's wonderful.
The next
Thank you.
book.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Eugenia, anything that you can't read from the book?
Well, Bianca came out almost 2 years ago now. So now I feel like a little time has passed and it's not so heavy and weighing on me the same. But in the beginning, there's a poem in here called The Commitment to Living Contract. And it's this thing that my therapist had me sign during a time when suicidal ideation was quite looming. It was during 2020 when everyone was a little off. And it takes language from that contract and mentions like some of the things that my husband he like met with my therapist and was told to like hide the pills and things like that. It was hard to read. It has a quote unquote happy ending, like this resolve at the end that I'm hoping is not so fake or saccharine, but felt authentic to me at the time. But I think in the beginning, like I've never read it in front of my husband, and I couldn't read it in front of people. I think because it was just like it became very present and weird, and time started to do strange things to my head. So
Yeah. Thank you again for sharing too, because I know even the practice of even talking about it sometimes, like you start feeling that stuff in the body. It's really crazy how, that phrase like words are things. It's a vessel, right? And when we walk into these poems, we're kind of stepping into those vessels and we kind of put the costume on for a sec. And, sometimes that stuff could still feel pretty icky.
Hence the rash.
It's lovely. It's rouge. Not rash, it's rouge.
There you go.
Okay, so
can I add something really quick just about Eugenia's collection too, when we were talking about like when you felt you could write about these things. I want people to know that I was the proofreader for Eugenia's book for Bianca.
for both my books.
Yeah, for
Wow,
both.
look at that.
And I can remember reading Bianca because, I was working on these poems while I was proofreading Bianca, and just feeling like empowered by your openness to talk about mental health. And I want to thank you for that gift. And I think that, the more people read about these topics and the more people write about them, the more it helps to destigmatize it. And so it was an honor to proofread your book, and it was a really powerful experience for me to be proofreading it while I was working on these poems. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, now it's a full circle because I feel like your poems are are empowering me to write the poems that I feel like I haven't been able to write. So we're just going to go around and around.
Okay, sounds good.
I think we're going to go around and around one more time for this last question.
That's what they call a virtuous circle, by the way.
Yeah. Thanks, Gabe. So we're going to do one more rotation in our virtuous circle here. So, we have a very diverse audience out there tonight, writers, non-writers, children popping their heads in and out, from two very strong women, very wonderful writers. What is some advice you would give to a writer, a non-writer, a child, in how to be more brave with telling the truth of their life?
Oh, it's interesting. Just the other day, somebody from junior high messaged me on Instagram, and she said, I've been reading some of your stuff, and I wish I had told you in junior high that my mom was going through something similar and my parents were separated, but I had to lie to everybody about it. She wasn't somebody that was a close friend, but she was an acquaintance, and she was in my classes. And we often think that we're alone and that no one else is going through what we're going through, but we're all just like on the verge of, being able to share, and we're all so afraid. But there's not a single person on this planet that doesn't have pain and that doesn't have trauma and that hasn't had something difficult happen to them. And I think when we open that door and open ourselves up, the response that I almost never get somebody saying, I can't believe you're telling me this. Like, that's never the response. The response is always me too, or my mother too. I've had so many editors or reading hosts say, my mom is in the audience tonight and she's got bipolar disorder. So thank you. 1 in 5 people in this country is living with a mental illness. And Bridget shared with us so many of the statistics for postpartum disorders as well. And it's just, everyone is struggling. And the more we can talk about it and the more we can normalize it, the braver you feel. Like, you have to do the scary thing in order to be brave. The bravery doesn't come first, it comes after.
Yeah. And then you also realize that, the fear was almost a fallacy because everyone is kind of in that same space. And it gets easier after that. It gets easier to be brave once you're brave once or twice. Yeah, that's beautiful, Eugenia. Thank you. Bridget, to close us out.
Just, spinning off of that same concept, it's easy when you're in these things to feel like you're alone, or that you're the only one, or that you're like messed up in some way. But I try to remind myself that, like, human history is long and there are billions of people on this planet. So no matter what you are thinking or what you've experienced, like, someone else has thought it or experienced it. And that's not to trivialize a person's experience at all. That's to point out that, like, there is someone else out there that you could, talk to, or that can empathize with you. So just that same idea of that, everyone has been through something, and sharing that pain or guilt or shame or fear or whatever makes the burden so much easier to bear.
That's wonderful. That's beautiful, y'all. I mean, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, Bridget and Eugenia, this was a lovely, lovely evening. Thank you for sticking around and entertaining the conversations in the chat and just being present with us. Gabe, I think at this point in time, it might be a good idea to let everyone unmute and let them all in to say goodnight. Thank you so much, everyone.
Love you,
Thank
Bridget.
Wonderful job, both of you.
You're both amazing. Thank you so much for sharing.
Love you.
All right,
so
say
much.
congratulations. Can't wait to see you on
You're
Saturday
amazing,
in
Bridget.
town.
Say congratulations.
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 We love you.
Aww.